For 2 seconds, nobody breathed. The sound Camilla had made wasn't loud, but it hit the room with the force of a gunshot. A wet, shocking strike. Completely out of place in a royal chamber built on centuries of composure and protocol. Princess Charlotte didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just froze, her cheek glistening with something no child, no person.
The Grand Heritage Chamber had seen centuries of royal triumphs and tragedies, but never anything like this. Moments after a trembling 9-year-old Princess Charlotte quietly acknowledged her great-grandmother's sealed succession letter, the room froze. Because Queen Camilla stepped forward with a stare, even the guards felt from across the floor. A whisper, a step, and then the unthinkable. A wet, sharp sound that didn't belong in a palace. Princess Charlotte's cheek glistened, and a royal guard, trained for war, not royal politics, made a decision that would change the monarchy forever. If this already has your heart racing, you're in the perfect place. Tap like, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who follows the royal drama as closely as you do. It helps more than you know, and trust me, today's story only gets more shocking from here. The halls of Windsor Castle carried a strange kind of quiet that morning, not the peaceful silence of a normal royal day, but the heavy stillness that happens when everyone knows something important is about to unfold. Even the air in the corridors felt different, as if it understood that history was waiting behind the tall carved doors of the Grand Heritage Chamber. Princess Charlotte walked between her parents, small steps, careful posture, navy coat perfectly buttoned. She wasn't holding anyone's hand, though Kate kept hers near, just in case. Charlotte had always been mature for her age, but today she looked older, not in a sad way, not in a forced way, just aware. Aware that the adults around her were tense. Aware that something about today mattered more than she fully understood. Behind them, Staff Sergeant David Mitchell watched closely. 8 years in Afghanistan, another 8 as a royal guard, and yet he felt something unsettled in his chest. Not fear, not nerves, just instinct, the same instinct soldiers develop after years of stepping into rooms where stakes are high and emotions are unpredictable. And today, emotions were unpredictable. King Charles' health had taken a sudden downward turn overnight. Not fatal, not yet, but serious enough that senior advisors insisted on initiating what they called continuity protocols. In plain language, it meant we need to know what happens next, just in case. Part of that protocol included opening a sealed letter written years ago by the late Queen Elizabeth. A private document, a guiding instruction for the monarchy's future, placed in writing long before today's uncertainty. And that letter, with the Queen's own handwriting, concerned Princess Charlotte. William had known. Kate had known. A few high-ranking advisors had known. But today, for the first time, the wider senior circle and Charlotte herself would hear exactly what the late Queen envisioned, which was why the atmosphere felt electric and fragile. Inside the Grand Heritage Chamber, the portraits of monarchs long gone watched from the walls. Their painted eyes followed every movement. Queen Elizabeth's portrait hung directly above the table where the sealed letter waited. Her steady expression, somewhere between warmth and sternness, felt more powerful than ever, almost prophetic. Charlotte noticed it. She looked up for half a second at the portrait, as if seeking quiet reassurance from a woman she barely remembered, yet somehow had always admired. Kate saw her glance and gently touched her daughter's back. "You'll be perfect," she whispered. Charlotte nodded once. Across the room, Princess Anne stood with her arms loosely folded. She wasn't smiling, but she seemed calm, determined, the kind of calm that only military-trained royals mastered. She'd been told the contents of a letter years ago. She knew exactly what today meant. And in the far corner, partly in the background but still present, stood Queen Camilla. Mitchell noticed her instantly, not because she stood out, but because something about her posture was wrong. Too rigid, too still. Her fingers kept drifting up to her necklace, tapping the pendant over and over. A nervous tell. He'd seen similar gestures in interrogation rooms, overseas people trying to hold on to something when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Camilla's eyes stayed on Charlotte, not on the letter, not on Charles, not on William. Just Charlotte. Mitchell logged that in his mind. Not suspicion, just awareness. Guards were trained to read people the way other professionals read maps. Finally, the senior archivist stepped forward, untied the navy ribbon holding the sealed envelope, and unfolded the late Queen's let. R with delicate precision. A hush fell. Even breath seemed too loud. The archivist began to read aloud. The Queen's words were direct, almost startlingly clear. She spoke of legacy, continuity, and the symbolic foundation needed for the future of the Windsor line. Charlotte wasn't being named heir. She wasn't being placed above her siblings. She wasn't receiving any political authority. But she was being called something unexpected, the cornerstone of generational stability, not a ruler symbol. A living representation of what the monarchy must protect if it hoped to remain meaningful. It was a rare thing, a deeply personal thing. A message from a grandmother who had lived through wars, loss, scandals, national shifts, and decades of change, and who understood that sometimes the smallest hands carried the greatest weight. As the archivist read, Mitchell noticed subtle reactions. William exhaled a breath he'd been holding. Kate blinked rapidly, absorbing the emotion, and gave one tiny nod of approval. And Charlotte stood still, listening, processing, calm, steady, surprisingly poised. But Camilla's face hardened. Just a tremor at first, a tightening around the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes, then a stiffness that spread through her entire face. Her fingers curled around her necklace, so tightly Mitchell could see the tension from across the room. The archivist finished reading and stepped back. "Your Royal Highness," he said gently, turning to Charlotte, "you're only asked to acknowledge the contents. Nothing more." Kate gave Charlotte a tiny squeeze. William offered an encouraging smile. Charlotte stepped forward alone. Her footsteps echoed softly across the polished floor. Every adult in the room watched, but she didn't rush. She didn't shrink. She simply walked with the kind of gentle dignity that came naturally to her. When she reached the table, she laid her hand on the document, not dramatically, not ceremonially, just respectfully. "I understand my great-grandmother's wishes," she said quietly. The words weren't rehearsed. They weren't formal. They were simply sincere. Something in the room shifted. The tension softened. A warm, almost proud silence filled the space. Except in one corner, Camilla's breathing changed. Subtle but sharp. Her eyes locked on Charlotte's face, dark with something Mitchell couldn't quite name at first: resentment, insecurity, fear, a beat too long, a gaze too intense. Then Camilla stepped forward. Mitchell's instincts flared instantly. He shifted his stance. He didn't move protocol required, stillness unless a direct threat emerged, but he watched closely. Every detail mattered. William noticed too. Anne uncrossed her arms. Kate angled herself closer to Charlotte. Even the archivist froze. Camilla kept walking, not fast, not slow, just steady, deliberate, controlled. She stopped only 3 feet from Charlotte, leaned down slightly, as if to speak privately, but nothing about her posture implied kindness. Mitchell felt the air tighten, the way it tightens right before a storm breaks. Charlotte looked up politely, still respectful, still calm completely, unaware that the moment was inches from spiraling. And then Camilla spoke. Her voice was low, quiet, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "You think this makes you special?" The words didn't echo, but they shook the room anyway. Charlotte blinked once, innocent confusion flickering over her face. "I never said it did," she answered softly. But Camilla wasn't finished. Her voice sharpened. "Your great-grandmother wrote that when she was confused." Charlotte frowned. Not offended, just hurt. Mitchell felt his hand instinctively shift closer to his rifle. Not to use, but to be ready. Camilla leaned closer. Too close. "You're not a symbol," she whispered harshly. "And you will never." She didn't finish the sentence, because something inside her snapped. And in that half-second, the trajectory of the entire royal family changed. Mitchell saw her shoulders tense. He saw her jaw twist. He saw the moment the line between emotion and danger vanished. He stepped forward, but Camilla moved first. A sudden, sharp motion. A sound that did not belong in any palace. Wet. Quick. Violent in its humiliation. Princess Charlotte flinched, just barely. The room went silent, and the world of the monarchy changed forever.
Should ever endure in a place meant to protect her. Sergeant David Mitchell's training kicked him before his mind even caught up. He moved with the kind of precision that came from years of combat. For long strides, boots thudding hard against the polished floor, rifle held low but ready. He placed himself between Charlotte and Camilla in a single, clean motion, like a shield dropping into place. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm but controlled, "I need you to step back." Camilla blinked, as if she hadn't expected consequences. As if spitting on a child, any child, let alone a future central royal figure, came without reaction. Her hand shook slightly. Her mouth parted. She seemed to search for anger to cling to, but found only shock. "Excuse me," she snapped, voice cracking. Mitchell didn't flinch. "Step back, please," he repeated, every syllable steady, unshaken. William moved first among the family. He wasn't shouting. He didn't rush. He simply reached Charlotte and pulled her gently toward Kate, who wiped her daughter's cheek with trembling hands. Kate's usual soft grace was gone. Her eyes blazed with something fierce and maternal. If the guards hadn't acted, if protocol hadn't existed, she might have confronted Camilla herself. And was next. She stepped forward with the stillness of a soldier assessing a battlefield. Her expression didn't soften or sharpen. It simply hardened into command. And when she spoke, the air tightened. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, "status report." Mitchell kept his eyes on Camilla. "Physical assault on a minor royal family member, ma'am," he said, crisply, "witnessed by myself and 40 others. The perpetrator has been instructed to step back and has refused." A murmur rippled through the aides and advisors around the chamber. Protocol wasn't just being followed. Protocol was about to be enforced. And enforcement inside the royal family was rare, almost unheard of, and his gaze locked onto Camilla with a coldness that could have frozen stone. "Camilla," she said, "not your majesty, not your royal highness, just a name, sharp, stripped of rank. You have 5 seconds to step away from my grandniece. After that, Sergeant Mitchell will have full authority to enforce removal protocols." Camilla's face twisted, anger, disbelief, humiliation flickering one after the other. She looked around the room, expecting someone to speak up for her, someone to say this was too much, someone to defend her title, her position, her pride. But no one moved. Not William, whose jaw was locked with fury. Not Kate, who clutched Charlotte protectively. Not the officials, who stared at the floor or at the walls, unwilling to intervene. Not even Charles, whose absence in the ceremony now felt painfully symbolic. And when Camilla finally stepped back, even that small movement felt like a collapse. Mitchell didn't relax. Protocol demanded constant readiness. His stance remained firm as the chamber doors burst open and Captain Richard Wells entered. Tall, composed, dangerous in the quiet way elite soldiers are dangerous. His presence changed the temperature of the room instantly. He approached Mitchell, eyes moving swiftly across the scene. "Report," he said. Mitchell delivered it in a clean, precise sequence, just facts, no emotion. Wells listened, nodded once, then turned to Princess Anne. "Recommendation, Your Highness?" And didn't hesitate. "Assault during an official succession-related proceeding. The victim is a minor. Enforcement of Crown protection laws is required. You have full jurisdiction. Wells faced Camilla. Your Majesty, he said, voice like steel wrapped in protocol. I am placing you under Crown detention pending investigation of assault against a protected royal family member. Camilla's eyes widened. You can't arrest me, she hissed. I'm the Queen Consort. With respect, ma'am, Wells said, your title does not exempt you from Crown protection laws. You will be escorted to the custodial facility immediately. 2 female guards stepped forward. They didn't grab her. They didn't threaten her. They simply positioned themselves beside her, silent, armed, unmovable. And, faced with no defenders, no allies, no escape, Camilla walked. She walked past William's silent fury, past Kate holding Charlotte close, past Anne's cold stare, past every advisor who refused to meet her eyes, past the portrait of Queen Elizabeth, who watched with quiet authority, and finally, past Sergeant Mitchell. As she passed him, Camilla looked up. For the first time, there was no anger, no arrogance, only the shock of a woman realizing that the institution she thought protected her had just delivered judgment. Her lips parted as if to speak, but she said nothing. The guards escorted her through a service door. Not the grand exit used for royalty, but the plain, unadorned one used by staff. That single detail said more than any punishment ever could. The door closed. Furniture didn't move. People didn't whisper. No one resumed breathing until Captain Wells gave the order. All units, he said into his radio. Code Saffron, lock down the chamber. No one enters or leaves without authorization. Gradually, the machinery of order began to move. Aides gathered statements, whispered updates, made calls. Officials scribbled notes. Lawyers began drafting emergency documents. The archivist resealed the Queen's letter with trembling hands. But Mitchell didn't move. He stood exactly where he was, guarding Charlotte. Even now, when the threat was gone, his duty wasn't reactive. It was constant. That was the difference between a soldier and a bystander. Across the room, William knelt to Charlotte. He wasn't comforting her like a parent soothing a frightened child. He was speaking to her quietly, something gentle, something grounding. Kate wiped Charlotte's cheek one last time, even though the spit was gone. It wasn't about cleaning. It was about reclaiming dignity. Charlotte's composure amazed Mitchell. She looked tired, sad, shaken, but not broken. There was strength in her small shoulders, in the way she leaned into her mother, in the way she watched the adults without panic. When she finally met Mitchell's eyes, he wasn't prepared for it. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply nodded. A tiny, solemn nod. A message without words. Thank you. Princess Anne approached Mitchell soon after. She didn't offer a smile or a pat on the arm. That wasn't her way. Instead, she studied the empty space where Camilla had stood. My mother, she said quietly, believed the monarchy survives because people like you understand when a line must be held. Today, Sergeant, you held it. Mitchell swallowed hard. Just following protocol, ma'am. No, and said firmly, protocol is permission. Conscience is action. And then she walked away. When the chamber finally emptied, Mitchell stayed. Orders were orders. Wells had said, remain until the room is secure. And so he remained, long after everyone else had gone, long after the echo of Camilla's footsteps had faded. For hours, the guard stood alone in the historic chamber, replaying the moment in his mind. The shock, the choice, the movement, the silence, and the realization that everything had changed. Because in a single awful second, a queen consort had crossed a line no royal should ever cross. And in that same second, a guard had stepped forward, protecting not just a child, not just a family, but the crown itself. The room chosen for Camilla's immediate holding was not a cell, not a dungeon, not anything close to the public imagination of royal punishment. It was a neutral space in a quiet Georgian building on the far edge of the Windsor grounds. No chandeliers, no polished floors, no portraits reminding her of the legacy she'd stepped into years earlier. Just 3 chairs, a plain table, and fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead. For someone who had lived most of her life surrounded by historic halls and royal protocol, the simplicity of the room felt strangely suffocating. Camilla sat alone, hands clasped tightly in her lap, the imprint of her necklace still faintly visible where she'd squeezed it over and over during the ceremony. A guard stood outside the door, silent, professional, unblinking. Her title didn't change that. Not today. Two investigators entered the room a few minutes later. Not palace staff, not advisors. These were professionals trained specifically for issues involving the crown, serious matters that required absolute neutrality. Detective Inspector Sarah Chun and Detective Sergeant Marcus Webb, both dressed plainly, both calm, unreadable. Chun sat across from Camilla and opened a slim folder. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice respectful but not deferential, "we need your formal statement regarding the incident in the Grand Heritage Chamber." Camilla looked up sharply. Incident. The word landed as if she'd been insulted. Chun didn't react. She simply said, "To proceed properly, we must begin with your account. From the beginning." Camilla exhaled shakily. For the first time since being escorted out of the chamber, her voice softened. "It wasn't intentional," she said. "I lost control. That's all." Webb scribbled a note, not on a laptop, not on a recording device, but by hand. Something about the old-fashioned way he wrote made every word feel heavier, more permanent. What led to that loss of control? Chun asked. Camilla hesitated, not because she was hiding something, because she was trying to choose the right version of the truth. She looked at her hands instead of at the detectives. She was standing there, Charlotte, so small, so calm, and everyone just accepted it. That letter, that moment, as if she had been chosen. She wasn't chosen, Chun reminded gently. She was acknowledged. It felt like choosing. Camilla's voice sharpened briefly. "Everything I've done for this family, everything I've endured, and suddenly, because of a letter written years ago, I'm irrelevant." Chun allowed a quiet pause. Experienced investigators knew silence could unravel a person more effectively than interrogation. "Is that why you approached the princess?" she finally asked. Camilla swallowed. "Yes and no. I didn't go there to hurt her." She lifted her eyes, tired, red, defensive. "I went to make her understand. She's a child. She doesn't grasp what it means to be put in that position. She doesn't understand the pressure." "And how did she respond?" Webb asked. Camilla's lips trembled, not with sadness, but frustration. She said she never claimed to be special. She said she was only doing what the Queen asked. "That's when She stopped. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I don't know what happened. It just happened." Chun didn't look away. "You spat at her." The words were direct, unsoftened, a fact laid bare on the table between them. Camilla's face folded with a mix of shame and disbelief. "I don't expect you to understand." "Try us," Webb said quietly. So Camilla did, haltingly at first, then with more urgency. She described the moment she broke, how the weight of years of public criticism, whispered conversations, sideways glances from courtiers, old wounds, new fears, and the terror being overshadowed had collided in the space of a heartbeat. When she finished, the room felt heavier. Chun closed the folder slowly. "Your Majesty, what you described is a direct violation of Crown protection laws. The victim is a minor. You acted during an official succession-related event. Your title does not shield you." Camilla didn't argue. She simply closed her eyes. For the first time in decades, she looked small, diminished not by the room, but by her own actions. As the formal process continued, legal acknowledgement, documentation, procedural signatures, Camilla answered each question quietly, not graciously, not humbly, but exhausted, like someone who finally realized the consequences of a moment they could never undo. When the interview ended, she was escorted, not marched, but escorted to a private residence on the outskirts of the state, a comfortable house. Clean, secure, monitored. But she did not have a key. She did not have free movement. She did not have influence. And she would not be appearing in public until the tribunal was complete. It was, in every meaningful way, a royal prison. Meanwhile, back at Windsor, Palace life had not returned to normal. It had shifted into a controlled state of urgency. Calm movements, firm instructions, serious steps taken with quiet speed. The monarchy had many faces, but when shaken, it moved with surprising efficiency. Reports were being drafted, advisors were reviewing protocol, lawyers were summoned discreetly. Medical staff checked on Charlotte, who insisted she was fine, but allowed the examination anyway. Kate stayed with her the entire time, never letting go of her hand. William stood in a private hallway with Princess Anne and Captain Wells. His face was set, not furious anymore, but resolute. She crossed the line. He said, "Charlotte's a child," and nodded. "Your daughter handled herself better than most adults would." William exhaled slowly. "I don't want her thinking she did anything wrong." "She doesn't," Anne replied. "Kate has already ensured that." Wells cleared his throat. "The Crown's tribunal will be convened within the week. Your father has been informed." That stopped the conversation for a moment. Charles. He had not been present during the ceremony. His health prevented him from attending, but he had been updated afterward. However fragile he was, he still needed to know the situation. How did he take it? William asked quietly, and his expression softened by a fraction. "As you'd expect, with sadness but clarity." William closed his eyes briefly. He nodded, then squared his shoulders again. Inside the palace, aides continued working, ensuring every detail of the incident was documented correctly. Even the decorative table where the late Queen's letter had been placed was photographed. Every witness statement was collected. Even the guards gave theirs. Mitchell's statement was the cleanest, the most precise. Years of military discipline had sharpened his instinct for clarity under pressure. He described the motion, the sound, the exact distance between Camilla and Charlotte. He described the timing, his reaction, the enforcement of protocol. He didn't embellish. He didn't minimize. Just truth, cold, clear, unavoidable. And that truth was enough. Hours passed. Evening crept over the castle grounds, dimming the windows with soft shadows. In a private wing, Charlotte sat in her room with Kate, quietly sketching in a notebook. Drawing helped her think, helped her breathe. She wasn't frightened, just thoughtful, processing. Children often understand more than adults assume. In the guard barracks, Mitchell finally removed his uniform jacket and sat heavily on the edge of his bed. His muscles felt tight. His mind replayed everything in sequence. The walk, the approach, the spit, the silence, his movement, the moment he placed himself between danger and innocence. He thought about Afghanistan, about the little girl who'd answered a question despite the Taliban watching. He thought of Charlotte standing in front of that table, voice steady despite not fully understanding the weight placed upon her. Duty had brought him into that chamber. Instinct had driven him forward. Conscience had anchored him there. And as the palace braced for the fallout, Mitchell understood that this was a kind of day that would be remembered. Inside the monarchy, inside the guard, inside the world watching from the outside. A queen consort was now under detention. A child had shown extraordinary grace, and the guard who protected her had become, almost by accident, the quiet center of the storm. The tribunal was coming. The headlines were coming. The world was coming. But for now, in the darkening calm of Windsor Castle, the consequences of one terrible moment were only beginning. Morning broke over Windsor Castle with pale, tired light. The kind of light that didn't brighten anything, just reveal what the night had left behind. News vans had already lined the perimeter roads. Reporters whispered into microphones. Commentators speculated in tones that swung wildly between shock and outrage. No one outside the palace walls knew the full story yet, but they knew enough, and they knew something unprecedented had happened. Inside the palace, the atmosphere felt heavier than the day before. Not chaotic, just sober. People moved with deliberate purpose, speaking in low voices, as if loud noise might shatter something already fragile. Every corridor carried the echo of the previous day's events. Every room held its breath. But in one small corner of the palace, a girl quietly drew pictures. Princess Charlotte sat at her desk, coloring a scene of a castle with wide green lawns. Beside her, Kate watched with an expression that blended pride, worry, and relief. William entered quietly, glancing around before kneeling beside his daughter. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Charlotte shrugged one shoulder. "I'm okay." Kate brushed her hand over Charlotte's hair. "You were brave," she said softly. Charlotte paused her drawing. "I didn't feel brave." "Brave people usually don't," William replied. "They just do the right thing anyway." Charlotte looked down at her hands for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Is she still angry?" William hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to choose the right version of the truth. "She's being taken care of," he finally said, "and the grown-ups will make sure nothing like that ever happened again." That answer satisfied Charlotte. She returned to her drawing, humming faintly under her breath. Across the palace grounds, Sergeant David Mitchell started his shift early. He'd barely slept, not because he was anxious about consequences. Those had already begun shifting in his favor, but because his mind kept replaying Charlotte's face. That calm, sad look she had given him. That small, steady nod. It had been years since anything had hit him emotionally. War did that to soldiers. It built walls, thick ones. But yesterday cracked something open inside him. He completed his rifle check, adjusted his uniform, and stepped into his assigned corridor. Guards he had served with for years paused as he passed. Some offered brief nods, some subtle smiles, but none dared speak out loud. Respect didn't need noise. He wasn't sure what surprised him more, that he'd been thrust into national news, or that he felt strangely humbled, almost unsteady, as if doing exactly what he'd been trained to do had somehow changed the course of his life. Then an aide appeared at the end of the hall, a young woman with neat posture and urgency in her steps. "Sergeant Mitchell," she said, "Princess, and request your presence." Immediately, Mitchell didn't ask questions. "Yes, ma'am." He followed her through unfamiliar parts of the palace. Private hallways, family wings, narrow staircases lined with muted carpets. When they reached in study, the aide knocked softly and opened the door, and was writing at her desk, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up, but didn't stand. She simply gestured to the chair across from her. Mitchell sat. "The investigation is complete," she said without formalities. "It confirms everything in your report, every detail, every action." Mitchell stayed silent. "Camilla will face the Crown Tribunal by the end of the week," and continued. "Her title will be revoked. She'll retain certain protections, but her public role is finished." Mitchell nodded once and closed a folder in front of her. "I want you to understand something. What happened yesterday will be studied, analyzed, debated. People will argue over whether the response was too harsh or not harsh enough. But inside this family, inside this institution, there is no argument." Her voice softened, only slightly, but enough. "You protected a child. You upheld the law. You demonstrated that the monarchy still has the courage to confront its own failures. That matters." She opened a small box and pushed it toward him. Inside was a silver medal, engraved with the date and the words, "For service beyond protocol." "This is from the family," she said. "Not for ceremony, for truth." Mitchell swallowed hard. "Thank you, ma'am." "No," and said, "Thank you." He left the study with the medal in his pocket and a heaviness in his chest he couldn't quite name. Not regret, not fear, something closer to conviction. Purpose, a feeling he'd only ever felt in combat. The knowledge that he did the right thing when it mattered most. 3 days later, the tribunal convened behind closed doors. No cameras, no press, no observers allowed. Camilla stood before the council, not in a crown, not in jewels, just in a plain dark suit. Her hand stayed clasped the entire time. The evidence was irrefutable. The witness statements aligned perfectly. The video footage, painful, undeniable, left no room for explanation. By afternoon, the verdict arrived. Her title, Queen Consort, was formally removed. Her public duties were dissolved. Her communications were restricted. Her role in the monarchy ended. She would remain at a secured residence with limited access to the royal family. The announcement released to the world was carefully worded, respectful, but firm. Conduct unbecoming of a titled royal. Violation of crown protection standards. Irreparable breach of decorum. Public reaction exploded instantly. Some were shocked, some furious, some relieved. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. Something like this had never happened before. A line had been drawn. 3 months passed. Mitchell found himself assigned to a new post. Close protection duty for Princess Charlotte during public events. Not because she was in danger, but because the family trusted him. The first day he accompanied her, Charlotte spotted him instantly. She walked over with that same thoughtful calm she always carried, hands folded neatly. "Hello, Sergeant Mitchell," she said politely. "Good morning, Your Highness." She hesitated. "I made something for you." She handed him a small handmade card, a new one, a drawing of a guard standing tall beside a little girl wearing a crown. The guard had broad shoulders. The girl had a shy smile. And above them, in careful handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for being a safe wall." Mitchell felt something tighten in his chest. Hard, unexpected. He bowed his head slightly. "It's perfect, ma'am." Charlotte smiled, genuine and bright, and joined her parents as the crowd applauded her arrival. Mitchell slipped the card into his uniform pocket, right over his heart. Years later, people would still talk about that day, about the silence in the chamber, about the guard who stepped forward, about the child who stood with dignity beyond her years, about the institution that chose to protect the vulnerable instead of the powerful. But the truth was simpler than the headlines. It was the story of a soldier who refused to let a child stand alone. A monarchy reminded that titles don't erase consequences. A little girl who learned what strength looks like. And a moment, brief, terrible, unforgettable, that reshaped the royal family from the inside out. Some said it was the day the crown grew a spine. Others said it was the day innocence was defended. Charlotte, in later years, would say only this: "It was the day someone chose to be brave for me." And Sergeant David Mitchell, even into old age, would remember one thing above everything else. Not the headlines, not the tribunal, not the medal, but the quiet courage of a 9-year-old girl who nodded at him in gratitude, trusted him completely in the worst moment of her young life, the moment the crown held its breath, and the guard held the line.